Ladies, ladies, ladies and gentlemen, well, fuck. First of all, let us begin unraveling ESMA from various positions, as I've mentioned in the first part. First of all, we will have a look in the part, ESMA as part of the ESFS, the European System of Financial Supervision. You do see here in the picture, or however you want to call that, the digital whiteboard. You do see the ESFS. The ESFS, as I've mentioned, is the European System of Financial Supervision, and it is consisting mainly of the first three institutions here. But people do forget most of the time that these two other ones here are also belonging to it, and that is one time the Joint Committee. So these three institutions, which are the ESMA, EBA, the European Banking Authority, and the EIOPA, the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority. Well, these three, they have a joint committee, which is kind of useful. Universities would be good orienting themselves in that way, because a multidisciplinary view is always a good thing. Besides, there is the ESRB, the European European Systemic Risk Board, also being part of the ESFS. So these institutions are existing. So these are the ESAs, standing for, again, we will have a lot of abbreviations, standing for the European Supervisory Authorities. Their main goals is resolving cross-border problems and to promote regulatory and supervisory convergence between the countries in the Union. But one thing is missing, and the ESFS is of course not only consisting of these three agencies here. Well, they are not really agencies, but institutions. We'll come later back to agency. The ESFS is composed mainly, of course, by its member states' NCAs, which then are supervised by these institutions, by these ESAs. Well, so the NCAs are actually grounding the ESFS, and NCAs are the national competent authorities, meaning the national competent authorities regarding financial regulation matters in the domestic branch. The job of the NCAs is supervising regulated actors according to the European rulebook. You should have watched the first version. The explanation is to find there. Just have it in mind as a collection of EU law. And the ESRB is, therefore, there's a line in between to distinct the ESRB from the other three options, from the other three institutions. That is the case because the ESRB is monitoring more on a pan-EU system-wide level in regards of risks. In regards of system-wide risks, that way. So it is more a macro-prudential supervisory institution and not so much involved in anything that is related to the ESMA, EBA or EIOPA, which are supervisory authorities, so ESAs, which, as I mentioned, have mainly the job of resolving cross-border problems and promote regulatory supervisory convergence. So the ESFS serves two functions. One time, it supports the development of the single rulebook that is adopted by the Council and the European Parliament as the legislative part, and the Commission, on the other hand, as the administrative rules component, so to speak. That's the first thing. Second, it provides supporting infrastructure for the coordination of supervision at the national level, so in the domestic areas. Thereby also, of course, it is involved, the function is involved in development of convergent supervisory practices. Yes, so now we have a picture of the ESFS, and since we want to have a look at how ESMA fits in that ESFS, this mechanism of the European Union, we of course need to know what the ESFS is and how it is organized, at least a little bit. So There's also to mention that that is always a little bit like in competition or in between the banking union. So the ESFS is not to mix up with the banking union. Therefore, we have this different sign here. The banking union goes actually back to the ECB. The banking union has three main operational areas, and that is the SSM, the SRM, and the SRB. The SSM is like in force. Is it the right word? Is established since 2014 and is standing actually for the single supervisory mechanism, meaning that the supervision of 6,000 banks of the euro area is in the hands of the ECB. Well, and that is the supervision of especially then the banking sector. If you want to know what then the EBA is actually doing, yeah, well, then you have to watch the video about the EBA. That will also come soon, somewhere. So we've had covered the SSM. SRM is in place actually since 2016, and brings the function of the SRM is to bring the SRB into place, because the SRM brings resolutions of SSM zone banks directly and indirectly to the SRB. And that also includes, by the way, the SRB is consisting also of the SRF, which is the Single Resolution Fund for resolutions, of course. Makes sense. So just to have in mind, the banking union is also existing, and they are driven. There are two mechanisms or institutionalized mechanisms, so to speak, but driven and shaped by very different forces, actually. The ESFS focuses on a single market solution for the European market, a single market, and therefore is involved in coordination-based arrangements. That is the task of the ESFS, actually. The banking union is an operational and executive organ, so it is not focusing on a single market thereby. On the other hand, it is more based on centralized supervision and risk mutualization, and currently limited in scope to banks. Well, since it is the banking union. Let us have a look into the ESMA regulation now, since we have to understand how is it positioned within this construct. And well, we will just look into the regulations, since everything regarding the ESMA is to find in there. The regulation is actually, so to speak, the constitution of ESMA. Well, it is maybe good to know that it is 1095/2010. That is the actual regulation, which then was amending the decision number 716/2009/EC, as always, and repealing Commission decision 2009/77/EC. Well, that is something you don't need to know, but is nice if you know that kind of thing. So let us have a look. First, it says must act in the EU interest alone. You can find that in the Article 1.5. So let us have a close look, because the Article 1.5 is still one of these articles that you can read. And it says the objective of the authority shall be to protect the public interest by contributing to the short, medium and long-term stability and effectiveness of the financial system for the union economy, its citizens and businesses. The authority shall, within its respective competences, contribute to. And now we do have like the tasks, actually. That's why it is useful to look into the regulation itself. So now just let me go quickly through the subsidiary objectives, which are now listed. And that is A, improving the functioning of the internal market, including in particular a sound, effective and consistent level of regulation and supervision. B, ensuring the integrity, transparency, efficiency and orderly functioning of financial markets. C, strengthening international supervisory, I actually don't know how to pronounce that. Supervisory? Can someone tell me? I have to look it up, I guess. Coordination. D, preventing regulatory arbitrage and promoting equal conditions of competition. And now there are three more regarding or respective investor protection. That is E, ensuring that the taking of investment and other risks are appropriately regulated and supervised. F, enhancing customer and investor protection. G, enhancing supervisory convergence across the internal market. We can see out of these statements, which are actually now only what means only, these are not the main goals of ESMA. These are just subsidiary objectives. We can see that there has to be a conflict between the EU financial governance, supporting EU integrated and financial services market, and the liberalizing and risk management demands that the ESMA is also inherent of. About that we will find out in a moment. So thereby we have a look why the ESMA is actually focused, or why in general EU is focusing on a single market solution. This has, among others, the following reasons. It is easier and cheaper to access capital for firms thereby. The market itself will be more deep and actually also more liquid, which was a problem in the 98 Russian crisis and the collapse of the hedge fund back then. Long-term investment capital. I forgot the correct name of the fund. Something like that. Lower costs for households to long-term saving products, and also promoting market-based funding instead of actually a dependency on banks. So before it was more bank-based funding, and that is actually part of the CMU agenda, which is the Capital Markets Union. All right, if you didn't get that completely right now, don't worry, because many of the things we will go into in detail right now, actually, or a little bit later. All right, ladies and gentlemen, yes, I've changed. Well, actually, I've not changed. It's just another day. Also, in my world, the time is not just standing. All right, but let's look at some more interesting things, which is now to have a closer look into Article 8, actually, of the ESMA regulation, which actually, in effect, defines various other tasks of ESMA. There are now various ways for ESMA accomplishing these various operational tasks or goals they do have. ESMA was finding its institutional feet back in that time, of course, since it was recently established, and then it was more preoccupied by advising the Commission on administrative rules, and the operating scope was confined, of course, then by a limited set of legislative measures. Of course, in that circumstance, it makes sense. So 2015, then, ESMA was turning to its supervisory powers, or better to speak, a supervisory convergence power, since its goal is the convergence, building an ambitious related agenda. By 2017, ESMA had become deeply embedded within EU financial market governance, and since then it gathered a huge amount of data also due to MiFID II. We will have a look into that soon. And my fear, that's the markets in financial instruments and demanding regulation, and thereby it actually gained more structural power. So ESMA was in effect advising the Commission on which classes of derivatives must be traded on traded venues, while they were advising formally to which derivatives must be cleared through CCPs. So ESMA, the CCPs are actually central counterparties. What you know, of course. You can check also the reference book lecture 433 there. That is explained in a little bit more detail than just saying what the abbreviation means. In the end, ESMA took its most overt political appearance by adopting forceful options on how EU 27 NCAs should approach Brexit-related issues. related relocation of UK firms. So we see ESMA has a lot of influence onto many things. And besides, it was then also shaping the CMU agenda. 2017, also the CCP supervision proposal suggested ESMA with new powers regarding the coordination of EU CCPs, which is quite a big thing. ESMA also proposed as the only supervision authority in crowdfunding services, better to speak, service providers, that's what I wanted to say. And these are then now also new channels of operating. So we do see ESMA has, and that was not everything, but these are the main things I think are important to consider. So we see it's a lot of channels ESMA does have and can use. So that as a basic overview, respective ESMA as a single market actor within the ESFS. So let's have a look at overlapping characterizations next. Because right, ESMA is part of the ESFS and thereby is taking part of the European system of supervision in these financial issues. But as we ascertained by now, ESMA is also an agency with financial market governance responsibilities. So how about that? And that will be the next thing we will have a look at, and this we will do here at this slide. So therefore, we do a look in Article 8, which defines, these kind of tasks of ESMA. The article is quite kind of, that's why I said before, this is one of the articles one is still able to read, because the other ones are, or can be, quite large, and this is one of them. Well, I'll just summarize it. So in terms of financial governance liabilities, ESMA defines in Article 8 four main branches, four main areas, and that is first the regulatory governance. Then, now how it will appear here is now always the branch will be named, and then the series of soft powers will be listed. So just that you have an overview. So regulatory governance, supervisory convergence is the next thing, then the risk assessment, and then direct supervision. So in terms of regulatory governance, we do see the series of soft powers ESMA is inherent here, or has power over, and is binding technical standards, also technical advice, which is the more important here. But as well, also an array of soft law like guidelines for NCAs, which can be required to comply or explain. So they also do have that power. Then in terms of supervisory convergence or supervisory convergence, I still didn't look it up, is they can engage in peer review, support cross-border supervisory inspections, and oversee colleges of supervisors. In terms of risk assessment, the series of soft powers is limited to reporting or reviewing risks, collating vast range of reports from the NCAs and collecting also, and empirical support to financial market policy development. In terms of direct supervision or also direct intervention in some cases, they do have the following soft powers: power to direct NCAs in exceptional circumstances, short selling, intervention powers, credit rating agencies, and trade repositories. These are the four main branches. So let us have a look in terms of policies, how ESMA was going forward in these regards. And there it is actually organized in 9 areas. It's a little bit, maybe dry now, but just stay with me. It's over in a second. Usage should be known, and the AIFMD actually as well. Then investor protection. There we go to MiFID and PRIPS as well, which is then more for the insurance-based products. Market abuse, market and investment firms, benchmarks, short selling, and post-trading. Currently developed and expanded by the CMU agenda. This is about the policy organization. Why we're looking into these things, just to organize a chain of thoughts here, is because we want to know how ESMA is actually working and what they are doing. And that's why we are having a look now at what is standing in the regulation. And they're defined, these 4 branches here. Itemization of tasks is how I called it. This is laid down in Article 8. And then ESMA is organizing policy activities in these 9 branches. And this is important to know because this is actually what ESMA is doing to a part. That's why we're having a look into it, just to remind yourself.